When the conversation about the legitimacy of the Daytona 500 comes up, I find it insane that a lot of motorsports fans and even some NASCAR fans think it's nothing more than a luck-based lottery and the only way you're going to win this race is if you avoid all the crashes. Now sure, things have changed over the past 3 decades in the racing to make it a lot closer, yet what people forget is that Chevrolet teams dominated the early 2000s by winning 6 Daytona 500s in 7 years. You also have Denny Hamlin now winning 3 of the last 5 races, and he's now going to go for the three-peat on Sunday. And then you have the Daytona 500 dynasty of the 1990s. And in my opinion, this is one of the most underrated accomplishments in NASCAR's entire history. This dynasty wasn't defined by luck or star power by any stretch of the imagination. Instead, it truly consisted of some of the hardest working and smartest individuals in the entire NASCAR garage, all striving to be the ones hoisting Harley J year after year. And that's what makes Morgan-McClure's stretch of 3 Daytona 500s in 5 years one of the most impressive feats in the event's great American history. With all great dynasties is of course an origin story, that of a guy who had a passion for cars and his partner in business. Larry McClure and Tim Morgan entered a team under the banner Morgan-McClure Motorsports beginning in 1983. However, the organization's true heart and soul really relied around 2 key people. The first was Tony Glover. As the son of racer Gene Glover, Tony helped his father win the NASCAR Sportsman Series National Championship in 1979. That hard work in late models granted him the opportunity to start with Morgan-McClure on the very first day of operation. And for 5 years, he was the guy building a consistent foundation on a stable race team with the likes of Lenny Pond, Tommy Ellis, and Joe Ruttman. Larry McClure recollected Glover's work in great praise, stating, "In his time, Tony was as good of a crew chief as there was in the sport." Eventually in 1988, the Morgan-McClure team was promoted to full-time thanks to an expanded partnership with Kodak Film. Still, even with a guy like Tony Glover as your crew chief, the team had a concerning amount of DNFs due to engine failures and other mechanical issues. This is where we see Sheldon Pittman, better known under the nickname Runt, come into the fold. The Washington, North Carolina native began constructing engines for McClure Motorsports in 1989 and had a profound talent in restrictor plates. And because of his presence on the team, McClure saw a 57% decrease in engine-related DNFs from 1988 to 1989. By 1990, they would bring that total down to a lone failure at the Summer Michigan race. So with one of the better crew chiefs and arguably the best engine builder in the entire garage, what was missing was a driver capable of getting McClure to victory lane and getting them over the top. Rick Wilson, while a key piece to their stability, just wasn't race-winning caliber. Newcomer Phil Parsons would be cut just 3 races into 1990. He wrecked quite a bit of equipment, and in a meeting between Larry McClure and Runt, they decided he wasn't a good fit for the team. So before race number 4 at Atlanta, the team attempted to resolve their problems at steering wheel within the week. Ernie Irvan, the stashed Californian, was eyed as the poster piece to McClure's era of success. He was described by former driver Rick Wilson as a hard race car driver and had actually tested with McClure at Atlanta prior to the season. Something else that added value into Ernie's decision was the fact that he was just at the young age of 31. A number that would be considered a liability in today's NASCAR was a common trend for teams in the 90s. Now what you gotta remember is nothing was set in stone to this point, as this was merely an audition for Ernie Irvan behind the wheel. And I'll tell you, Ernie Irvan would get up on that wheel and take full advantage of the opportunity. The impact he had on the team was present the minute the green flag flew for the Motorcraft Quality Parts 500. Rolling off from the 30th position, Irvan was on a $1 million mission to retain his ride at McClure, and by lap 39, he had cracked his way into the top 5 by easily passing the defending champion Rusty Wallace. It was going to be hard beating Dale Earnhardt on that day, considering only 7 cars finished on the lead lap. However, Ernie Irvan proved to be one of those only cars that could be even on the same pace, finishing 3rd and leading lap 235 of the race. It's safe to say the audition worked out really well, and Irvan became the team's primary driver right after that. Later that year, on January 25th, 1990, the team's 164th Cup race, Irvan dominated the last 5th of the race, including leading the final 90 laps to get the team its first victory. McClure was finally putting things together thanks to Irvan's talent and a mid-season switch in nameplate to Chevrolet. Aspirations were high heading into the dawning of the 1991 season in Daytona. Of course, this would be the 33rd running of stock car racing's marquee event, which proved to be a battle between 3 teams for the Harley J. Earl Trophy. The high and mighty Dale Earnhardt began his NASCAR Cup title defense as the overwhelming favorite to finally win his first 500. Throughout Speed Weeks, the iconic black number 3 was unbeatable and on a completely different racetrack than his competitors, winning the Busch Clash, taking the lead on the first lap of his dual race and never looking back. When you look at the 70 laps of Cup competition prior to the 500, he was in the lead for 97% of it. Talk about sheer domination. Still, he wouldn't be satisfied with these accomplishments if he didn't come home with the Harley J. Earl Trophy. Now fortunately, most everyone in Daytona Beach wanted to see him win.
Ken, if you have a good close look at the left front corner of Dale Earnhardt's car, you'll find not everybody here is a fan of his. He has hit a seagull in a critical part of that car, right in the inlet for the oil cooler.
Except of course for the Daytona Beach Seagulls, so correction, most people wanted to see him win. Also in the mix was Kyle Petty. Pulling off such a big win would mean big things for his career as he could finally truly emerge from his father's footsteps and make his own path as a NASCAR Cup driver. The third team just happened to be the Morgan-McClure number 4. They were the clear Cinderella story of Speed Weeks 1991, with changes paying off the very minute they hit the pavement. Ernie Irvan was able to snag the outside pole with a time just over 46 seconds. Now in terms of the duels, they were hit with a heavy dose of reality by losing the lead to Dale Earnhardt on lap 1 of the race. Irvan would then be relegated to do something he hated dearly, and that was racing in Dale Earnhardt's tire tracks. Still, he had the track position and a 50-lap drafting session to learn something from the best driver in the garage. If anything, that's a huge advantage for a driver to compete. These drivers would be the main focus as the green flag for the 1991 Daytona 500 was dropped. So while the heavyweights jockeyed for the lead, Ernie Irvan was quietly up front until a penalty sent him to the back. He would get black flag for jumping out of line on a restart and at one point restarted the race nearly 2/3 of a lap down. Fortunately, the cautions would fall in a timely manner and he would retain his lead pace. Ernie Irvan remained in dirty air until lap 124, where he would usurp former McClure driver Joe Ruttman from the lead. Through pit cycles and the ebbs and flows of the race, Irvan lost the lead, but he remained in contention as the 500-mile spectacle wound closer to the finish. By the time we get to the final caution, when Rusty Wallace wrecks out of the race, there was only one car in between McClure and Daytona 500 glory. It doesn't seem like an impossible task, but then you realize the guy leading was Dale Earnhardt, the very guy Irvan just could not pass to save his life 72 hours earlier. Add in what was at stake for the Intimidator, you just figured this was his race to lose. It would be a true David vs. Goliath battle for the bright and shiny Harley J. On the restart, Irvan laid back and gave Dale Earnhardt a massive jump up on the field. To many, it looked like it was race over. But in a draft-style Daytona 500, this was a bit concerning for Dale Earnhardt. Quickly, the cars behind Irvan got up to speed and helped Irvan close the gap quickly. Within a lap, Ernie Irvan passed Dale Earnhardt with ease.
Davey Allison coming up to 3rd, Kyle Petty in 4th. Now Kyle drops back and it's Joe Ruttman into 4th. Look at this run down the inside. Car number 4 sliding through and Ernie Irvan flanks it in there.
It was a beautiful pass, but there was one thing that made this much more impressive. He did this all with 25-lap older tires. Rather than try to regroup and gang up on Irvan, the Goliaths of Dale Earnhardt and Davey Allison fought a grueling battle for second place. This would end up proving to be their demise and the championship clinching moment for Ernie Irvan.
And there's trouble up the turn 2. Ernie Irvan in front and Earnhardt. Davey Allison and then Dale Earnhardt and Davey Allison both out of this race.
With Kyle Petty, Davey Allison, and Dale Earnhardt all out of the race, David had won. It's hard to top that first elusive victory as a team, but Ernie Irvan and McClure's upset in the Daytona 500 was their biggest win to date, especially considering they would pocket $233,000 in prize money, which is always good for a single car operation. This would later prove to be a competitive season for the McClure entry. Ernie Irvan was a championship contender up until race 25 and finished top 5 in the season point standings. following the impressive season, their focus was now on defending Daytona in 1992. So as the defending champs for this race, they were in the conversation but not gravitated to once again like Earnhardt, Petty, and Allison were. However, he was taken out completely as he ultimately got collected in the big one on lap 93, and a solo wreck on lap 167 proved to be the final dagger. Ernie Irvan would gain redemption during that summer's Pepsi 400. For 73% of the race, the remaining 39 cars could do nothing but ride the back bumper of Irvan's Lumina. 3 weeks later, he conquered the monstrous Talladega Superspeedway for his third and final win of the 1992 Cup season. So with winning the past 2 plate races, Ernie Irvan was definitely in the conversation for the 1993 running to win his second 500 in 2 years. Now, it didn't look like that during time trials at all, as Irvan timed in at just under 48 seconds, well off his outside pole time 2 years earlier. He would end up faring much better in the duels, turning a mid-pack 11th place start into a 4th place finish. However, unlike what he could do in mid-pack, that just did not translate to the race. He would once again lead 0 laps and DNF for the 2nd straight year. Irvan once again found redemption by repeating at Talladega in the spring, but McClure's season was a rather regressive one, unfortunately. Way too many inconsistencies, specifically engine and part failures, kept them out of championship contention. As 1993 looked more and more to be a disappointing year, it would take a chaotic turn on July 13th, 1993. Rising star Davey Allison lost his life. The car he would leave behind wasn't just a mere field filler or a mediocre ride that just so happened to have a well-known sponsor, because this is of course the 90s. It was none other than the Robert Yates 28. This car was easily a top 5 car on the NASCAR Cup circuit thanks to Davey Allison's skill and Larry Mack's abilities as crew chief. Even with Allison gone, they were capable of even more wins and potentially a championship. This was a prime opportunity for the taking, and it wasn't just going to be ignored. And so, as the summer of 93 wound down, it ultimately swirled around to Ernie Irvan that he was in fact the prime candidate for this vacancy. Larry McClure himself didn't know about Texaco and Ford pursuing Irvan until he had a phone call with Jack Roush. So in result to that, eventually at Bristol, he would ask Ernie if there was any truth to this rumor. Now, compared to today, I would say it's much harder to obtain real news. You've got to keep in mind, the internet, it was still in its infancy, and it was much harder to obtain legitimate news from trusted sources besides the morning paper. Nonetheless, this story turned out to be true, as Ernie replied by saying, "Yep, I'm going, and you can't stop me." Now, the most ironic thing I would say about this story is that Irvan's car wound up having a few engine issues during the weekend, including one that ended his night on lap 316. Larry McClure never confirmed it, but many believe at the time this was intentional. As for Ernie Irvan, betraying Larry McClure and Kodak to join the greener pastures of Yates would come with little controversy, except for the fact that Irvan was blatantly ignoring his contract. The feud between Larry McClure and Ernie Irvan escalated over the coming weeks and led to a brutal legal battle in the courts. McClure wanted either Irvan to race his car or pay a hefty price. With his successes, Irvan claimed he was massively underpaid. This was largely in part due to his contract not having a base salary and receiving only 40% of the team's winnings. Then officially, on September 4th, 1993, Ernie Irvan was officially released from his contract. Irvan reportedly paid McClure a grand sum of $400,000 to break his contract a year early and join Robert Yates. So Irvan immediately went to a revised championship contender and rattled off dominant victories at Martinsville and Charlotte. McClure, meanwhile, toughed out the rest of 93 with interim drivers Jimmy Hensley, Joe Nemechek, and Jeff Purvis. The best any of them could do was a 13th place at Dover 3 laps down. So far, it was clearly Ernie Irvan getting the best of his old team, and he was seeing that Kodak number 4 as nothing more than a moving chicane to his trophies. So without Irvan now, Larry McClure and Tim Morgan needed yet another stable driver to keep pace in the NASCAR Cup garage. The guy they saw that could get them to the top of the mountain was veteran Sterling Marlin. This is a guy that had been in the sport since he was a teenager, working hard to climb up to a competitive ride. However, in 278 career Cup races, he had no wins with a best career finish of 2nd. Ironically, 3 of those 2nd place finishes were to Ernie Irvan and the Morgan-McClure team, including the 1991 Daytona 500. This move certainly drew scrutiny within the sport and even within the team's manufacturer Chevrolet, as recollected by Larry McClure. They didn't want us to get Sterling because he had run over 300 races and hadn't won. But Sterling had a relationship with our team. Runt had built engines and served as crew chief for Sterling when he drove for Haas Ellington. Not to mention in this whole deal was that McClure was a fundamentally structured team. You could make the argument that Marlin's laid-back team approach was a much better fit than the self-centered vibe of Ernie Irvan. Sterling Marlin's veteran and superspeedway experience was, I think, the main reason why they pursued him in free agency. I would also say Sterling Marlin and Morgan-McClure's goal of wanting to beat Ernie Irvan was also a side reason for pulling off this move. Many critics overlooked the potential they had. However, the skills this duo had would work greatly to their advantage in the 1994 Daytona 500, a race mired in the tragedy due to the deaths of Neil Bonnet and Rodney Orr. Compared to prior plate races, this would be a more tame race with not a lot of aggressive moves, maybe outside of the final couple laps. A race that would play greatly into the hands of a veteran like Sterling Marlin. So from the 4th starting position, thanks to his runner-up finish in Duel 2, it was a calculated first half for Marlin. He wasn't jockeying for the lead, but he kept up with the contenders while remaining ahead of the hot spots for crashes. Marlin wouldn't officially take the lead until lap 149 when he passed Derek Cope. In a race mired by fuel strategy, Marlin did a great job remaining up at the front of the pack. He was in the very position he needed to be in at the top of the leaderboard to win this race. So flash forward to 2 laps remaining, the 1994 Daytona 500 became something straight out of a movie for Morgan-McClure Motorsports and Sterling Marlin. All of Marlin's competitors had been all but eliminated except one. That remaining car challenging Marlin's butterscotch painted Chevrolet Lumina, none other than the black Ford Thunderbird with the bright red 28. In this Speed Weeks, Ernie Irvan was arguably the favorite to take the 36 500 with his skills showcased at McClure combined with the powerful Robert Yates engine. In fact, he was almost unbeatable throughout the first half of the race. Meanwhile, in the last quarter, he was the only car to successfully pass Marlin until he got loose exiting turn 3, which turned over the lead back to Marlin. That lost him a ton of track position, but as the cars began to run out of fuel or fade from the picture, he was right back in the running. So that left only 2 outcomes left on the table. Successfully hold off the 28 and the number 4 team would become Daytona 500 champions. Or history repeats itself as Marlin chases Irvan's bumper once again and McClure watches in agony as their former driver hoists the Harley J. Earl trophy. Sterling Marlin would take the white flag and retained his lead throughout the backstretch. Despite a last-minute push by Irvan to get past him and win this race, the Harley J. Earl would ultimately fall further and further away from his grasp until he hit the checkered flag.
To the inside comes the 28, coming to the line. Sterling Marlin's going to win it.
And just like that, Ernie Irvan was eliminated and Sterling Marlin had finally won a race. McClure now had not only 1, but 2 Daytona 500 championships to their resume. And most importantly, both driver and team had gotten their revenge on Ernie Irvan. Larry McClure later recalled the outcome as a little satisfying to say the very least. I know if I were in that position to beat your former driver who betrayed your organization, I would be absolutely pumped after that finish. Following the Daytona 500, the very next week at Rockingham, he kept up the momentum by finishing in the 2nd position. Unfortunately, this would be the final week that he held the points lead as, from there, the team got very inconsistent and finished a mediocre 14th in the final standings. In fact, they were so disappointing that they failed to lead as many laps as they had in the first 2 races of that season. I would say, along with the disappointing season, the best thing about 1994 ending was that the next race was the Daytona 500. Once again, this team had an outside shot with their well-structured team and performance. But unlike previous Daytona 500s, this McClure team would have a different tune as the defending Daytona 500 champions.
This is just his first lap.
This thing just sounds fast, doesn't it?
It does sound fast. Sounds like it's got a turbocharger or something.
Yeah. High-pitched sound.
So you may be asking, why on earth did the McClure entry sound more like an Indy car rather than a NASCAR stock car? This is all thanks to Boyd Butler, but better known under the nickname Dr. Gas. I'm telling you, if I were in the race team industry, I would definitely look into doing some deals with him. After all, it's Dr. Gas for crying out loud. So as for his relation to McClure, before the season he struck a deal to install the X-Pipe in Marlin's car for the 500. Dr. Gas advertised this to help them get 3 to 4 miles per hour faster on the speed chart, and it is why the car had such a unique sound. This was the NASCAR team equivalent of signing a relief pitcher in the offseason. It would make already the defending champions in the 500 much faster, and it would show on the racetrack. Sterling Marlin dominated his dual race to lock in a 3rd place starting position. And with that speed, why on earth would you wait around until the second half when you can just take the lead from Dale Earnhardt on lap 3? Thanks to fellow Chevrolet teammate Jeff Gordon, the two worked really well together to remain up front through a 500 mired by rain and cautions. Unfortunately, Marlin would lose his drafting partner mid-race, as the 24 team would blow their opportunity and leave the 500 win to be decided by the two dual winners, Sterling Marlin and Dale Earnhardt. In the final half of the race, the two Monte Carlos combined to lead 97 laps to end the race. Sterling Marlin had the upper hand, but Dale Earnhardt's pit crew came in clutch and got him the lead with 38 to go. Earnhardt would play a solid defense, but the raw speed just would not be silenced for long. With 20 laps to go, Marlin made his move on the backstretch and retook the lead. What wasn't known at the time is that this pass would become the true turning point in the 500 that set the stage for the finish. Bobby Labonte would ultimately wreck out of the race with 15 laps remaining, leaving a split strategy between the two frontrunners. Tasked with a tough decision, both Tony Glover and Andy Petree would play their cards. Sterling Marlin would take advantage of the track position by staying out. Dale Earnhardt, meanwhile, elected to get 4 fresh Goodyears and give up pretty much all of his track position. Dale Earnhardt would now be on the offensive with much fresher Goodyears than Marlin. However, to better Marlin's chances, Dale Earnhardt had a long wave of cars to maneuver with just 10 laps remaining in the race. It would take a massive rally by the Intimidator to make this a close finish. Knowing there was no time to waste, quickly the intimidating black and silver Monte Carlo went on a tear, moving into the top 3 with 5 laps to go. With 3 laps in the race, he passed Mark Martin to put him within 1 spot of claiming his first Daytona 500. The crowd and CBS started to get a little excited as they knew they were on the cusp of finally seeing Dale Earnhardt win Harley J. In fact, Jeff Gordon behind the wheel even stated over the radio, Earnhardt's got this in the bag. Still, the one car in the way was Sterling Marlin. The Kodak number 4 was the crowd silencer with the X-Pipe, and now they could do so by defeating Dale Earnhardt yet again. All Marlin needed to do was hold his ground for 2 more laps, and his dominant defeat of Dale Earnhardt would forever be ingrained in history. Thankfully for McClure, they could easily play defense even with much older tires. Dale Earnhardt had no drafting help behind him, and he just couldn't close the gap on Marlin to get alongside or even pass him for the lead. For the 7-time champion, more agonizing pain would be felt at the hands of the now Goliath number 4.
And the winner of the 1995 Daytona 500 is again Sterling Marlin. Morgan-McClure, 9th career win, and 3 of them have been here at Daytona.
So with that victory, Sterling Marlin joined a rare club of drivers to win back-to-back Daytona 500s. The other 2 drivers, Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough, who combined together won 10 championships at the Cup level. The victory marked what would later be known as the prime year for both driver Sterling Marlin and the team. So now we get to 1996 with Sterling Marlin defending his championship for the 2nd year in a row. And in that defense, Marlin led the first 29 laps of his dual race. He ultimately lost to Dale Earnhardt, but with Earnhardt starting on the pole for Sunday, the number 4 Kodak Film Chevrolet would roll off from the 2nd row. This would give him a fantastic chance to make NASCAR history as the only driver to win 3 consecutive Daytona 500s. On lap 77, those chances skyrocketed as Marlin passed Terry Labonte to take his first lead of the afternoon. Morgan-McClure, once again, they looked to be contenders and a tough team to beat on this sunny Sunday afternoon in Daytona. Unfortunately, disaster would strike 3 laps later. The engine department, a great part of McClure's success over the past few years, would prove to be their very downfall on that particular afternoon. For many, this would be considered the turning point for McClure, as this would be a regressive season for Marlin behind the wheel. As for their Daytona 500 chances, this would prove to be their last race as one of the favorites, and they would slowly fade from the picture after that. In 1997, Marlin had a top 5 car in the race, but he just couldn't battle the Hendrick Motorsports juggernaut of Jeff Gordon, Terry Labonte, and Ricky Craven. This was largely due to Tony Glover, the glue to this team, departing and joining Team Sabco. 1 year later, it would be Sterling Marlin defecting to Team Sabco. The new blood of Bobby Hamilton and Robert Larkins failed in picking up the Dynasty, with finishes of 12th, 29th, and 43rd over the next 3 500s. Never once in that window did they have any speed to compete with the likes of Earnhardt, Gordon, and Jarrett. And surely over time, the McClure Motorsports entry faded to a field filler in the early 2000s, failing to qualify from 2006 to 2007, and unfortunately where they are today, completely out of the NASCAR Cup Series and nothing more than a distant memory. However, unlike some of the now defunct teams, they leave a great and, in my opinion, underrated legacy when it comes to their success on the track. The McClure team easily gets overshadowed by the likes of the dynasties of Petty and now Hamlin winning 3 Daytona 500s in 5 years. Even though the McClure Motorsports team did much more than just simply prove they could win the Daytona 500 again and again. 1991, they were the underdogs that stunned the NASCAR world. 1994, they proved they were no fluke 500 champions by beating their former driver on a better team. And in 1995, they ended as the team to beat in the 500 through complete domination and speed. This may end up being a bad take, but Runt, Pittman, and Tony Glover deserve to be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Or, I'll rephrase this to be conservative, at the very least get on the ballot. Still, Morgan-McClure's 500 success in the 90s doesn't need to get recognized by the Hall of Fame to be hailed as a dynasty. I'd say the history and the hard work this team put in speaks loud and proud for itself. So anyways, this is NRF signing out, and just remember, life's a beach and then you drive.